It's time to talk about Viktor Gyökeres. Most of you right now will have already formed your opinion on him. He may be a problem in your eyes. Maybe Arsenal aren't adapting enough to him. There is so much noise, and I'll admit myself as someone who, after scouting Gyokeres in the summer, would probably have classified themselves as hopeful but aware of the player's current limitations. But I found it really hard to hold my opinion in one hand whilst acknowledging that other people can see things in a different way and potentially shed new light, but then also just to watch Gyokeres objectively on the pitch. My hope is that today's video brings some genuinely new light on the analysis around Gyokeres. I want to look at how he can improve in a crowded box, answer that debate that's running at the moment between Arsenal maybe needing to create more for him against what he needs to give us himself at times. I want to talk about movement, the positive stylistic effects Gyokeres has had on us, the difficulties he's found making it stick, some solutions, and my conclusions on him so far. Even if you don't agree with me at the end, I want us all to at least be a little closer to answering the question, what's going on with Viktor Gyökeres? I think it's worth reminding everyone, whilst things are fresh, that the plan for Gyokeres from a squad building perspective went out the window from day one. As I've said all season, I saw Gyokeres as another option, as a player we didn't have to put under a microscope to see what he was and where he fitted best. But after Havertz's injury, that phasing in period was fast-tracked, and the games where we would default to Havertz, where you feed off scraps, for instance, the away trips to St James's Park or to Anfield, Gyokeres was thrown in and he found out very quickly that things in England were different. I'm not exempting anyone from criticism here, by the way, but at least it sets the scene for how a much bigger burden and responsibility has been placed on Gyokeres than was probably initially intended. But the matter of fact is that he has played a lot of games for Arsenal, and even though he has his stylistic tendencies, he's played a lot of games in an Arsenal team who dominate around the opposition box, meaning that any centre forward is going to spend a lot of time in these types of situations. So I want to start with that, looking at Gyokeres inside the box. On your screens are two passages of play where the ball ends up whizzing just by Gyokeres sliding in. In the passage from the Wolves game, for many Gyokeres anticipates Saka's early cross a bit too late, or he hesitates just before committing. I don't think either of those, though, are the real issue here. Look at his tap-in against Forest. He has to slow down because, in very simplistic terms, it's far easier to move on to a ball instead of react to one that's been pulled behind you. The problem that has emerged in the box for Gyokeres is when he's having to accelerate in these positions or set off from a standing start, he does not possess that elite burst to nip just in front of a defender, and there have been a few too many of these overreaches for my liking. Now, we can't look any further than a Mikel Merino to know that not all centre forwards have or need to be able to explode away from their markers to create that separation, and I think Gyokeres has to prove that he can latch on to a few more of these opportunities. I think that's really key for him. But for Merino, he always commands the area that he's in, I feel. And there's literally a kind of flexibility that Merino has in the box. An ability to play on his tiptoes, to sort his feet out quickly. And maybe time will reveal that for Gyokeres. But at the moment, I'm sceptical. There's also that fighting with defenders argument and the threat to dominate someone in the air. Let's start with the grappling matches that have been well reported that Gyokeres gets into in the box, and let's stay with the Wolves match here for relevance. When I've watched back Gyokeres, I actually don't think he fights enough. And what I mean by that is this kind of batting off of this kind of contact. He's wrestling, yes, but not actually to create that separation that will give you half a yard to get a run on the defender, which is all you need. He goes into that battle, I think, the grappling battles too willingly, almost commits to them. And if you watch someone like Erling Haaland instead, how everything Haaland does is to create that space between him and the defender. Even that means batting off the hands that go around his shirt and pull him and try and yank him one way or the other. And then, of course, when you have to engage in a fight with him, he steamrolls you. And look, he's going to score headers for us. His aerial struggles have been well reported and correctly reported, but I've never got this sense with Gyokeres that he's going to tower above someone at the back post. Arteta spoke about the chance creation for Gyokeres being a collaboration between him and the team. And of course, that is correct. But some centre forwards dominate their spaces. And because of this, they turn hopeful crosses into high XG chances. They can turn blind cutbacks into a ball on a plate for a tap-in, if that makes sense. White's cross against Brentford was by no means hopeful, but watch how Merino makes that false movement, then darts across the front post. This is the level of detail I think that is missing from Gyokeres' box play at the moment, and then the header from Merino is someone just simply so in control of the area around them. Part of me thinks that Gyokeres would actually have moved closer to the centre-backs here, and he'd be making a dart in between for a flat ball. Maybe not, but watching him more closely, and I'm about to get into all the really good movement that he has, but inside the box, I don't see these kind of fake movements or double movements. It's too easy, I feel, for the defenders to block him out. I'm not a striker coach, but can he add these layers of detail? Let's talk, though, now about wider movement for Gyokeres, his wider effect on the team, and answer this question, finally, of are Arsenal looking for Gyokeres enough? Let's go back to Arteta's comments on collaboration. Runners, players who thrive in open spaces, they do need certain relationships. When Martinelli has a partner he can rely on, how often does he come alive? I still remember whenever Fabio Vieira picked up the ball, Martinelli would have already set off if he was close by. Gyokeres, of course, isn't as snappy as Martinelli, but the point still stands. And after re-watching, I'm pretty convinced that you can't say, and the argument that the team aren't looking for him, I don't think it holds up. Gyokeres is certainly on Odegaard's mind whenever he can look up and over a block. Timber has often looked to release him into the channels early, and Saliba doesn't play this kind of straight ball if Gyokeres isn't there. We aren't ignoring Gyokeres, but maybe we have to understand better the spaces he attacks better himself. Because the hunger, the immediacy of his runs is a real and an impactful thing. And when we are talking about using his intent to stretch the pitch well, creating shooting conditions for him, and that kind of rhythm, the connections and the balance that we were beginning to find before his injury, this dynamic is as close to a guaranteed one as you can get for Gyokeres succeeding. And it's that moment against Leeds I'm going to start with. We have this left winger stretching wide and attracting the fullback up the pitch, and two movers in the half space. The first run-up becomes a distraction, often moving at a diagonal to encourage the space for Gyokeres to lean into, but also to open up the pocket for that second mover. Often this is Calafiori and Rice dovetailing each other, and whoever it may be passing looks to release Gyokeres in behind. And it's these situations where you go, oh, okay, you've got something to offer us that I would struggle to find somewhere else. Because there's been a lot of talk about Gyokeres occupying the centre-backs, and as I've said before, it's become overblown, overstated, or at least I think examples have been framed in a way that paints Gyokeres as the only player capable of occupying a back line in this way. To try and flesh this out a bit more, in our 4-0 mauling of Spurs, every goal is a different player stretching or occupying from the centre-forward position. And the crucial next step for us is to find the right balance, the right counter movements off them. And as we did on the day, it was pretty much Eze every time doing this successfully. But this isn't to discount what Gyokeres does, but to help see the times where he is genuinely making a difference by being the player with completely different tendencies, habits, looking to stretch teams in different ways. Again, we were beginning to take advantage of this before his injury, accessing the middle if the centre-backs or the backline stayed put on him, making the most of our overloads to create here. That might be one of our pivots joining in. I spoke about Gyokeres overreaching for balls at the start, but I love this chance that he makes for himself against Atletico Madrid. Yes, it's simply awesome from Zubimendi, but Gyokeres turns this situation into a shot on goal. The aggression is undeniable. Can he make these types of scenarios more repeatable? Maybe that's to do with shedding a bit of weight from his top half in terms of muscle. I don't know, but we need more of this is what I do know. I now want to speak about Gyokeres and Trossard because in the Premier League, against defensively organised oppositions, Trossard has made himself pretty indispensable at the moment. He allows the left half space to pop, to come to life for Arsenal. He has this unique variety of pass that gives us real incision through the left-hand side, and this is also, when we're talking about helping Gyokeres, one of those examples where you're not reaching to see something in Gyokeres, but there really is something here. Trossard has nailed these sweeps over the shoulder of a fullback, using decoys well and delaying until the right moment. And for all the discussion that we can have about Gyokeres back to goal that I'll get into, this is expertly done. It helps that the defender is looking to win the ball, not just shield him, which makes it easier for Gyokeres to wriggle clear. But there's clearly more of a comfort in these situations where he can use as well his shoulders, his sides a bit more. Everything isn't just straight up and vertical on his backside. There's clearly a template to work with here. Trossard showed it again against Olympiacos, using that first runner as a decoy. I think there's rightly a conversation about setup and how many touches Gyokeres may need to get shots off, but from these angles and situations, he's going to get a powerful shot on goal. And if you cast your mind back to Fulham, one of the first games where we began to successfully deploy that kind of stack of three between the lines, we allowed Leandro Trossard again to find that overload, use that first mover as a decoy and leave Gyokeres just to lean off the last line. The final action from him is rushed here, as is the effort that he had a little bit later from the slip ball off Bukayo Saka, but there was a clear instruction, I think, for Gyokeres to get shots off quickly in this game, and that came after the Newcastle performance where, again, that clustering centrally to let him just lean and feed off the last line saw him slipped in, but the windows closed too fast for how long he took to get shots off. But on a side note, these are the kinds of positions we can pinch an Eberechi Eze into when he's moving in off the left wing. He's not always just going to be in this backboard role that Merino's in here. And look, separation for Viktor Gyökeres has been a problem so far. I think some of the thought process behind a Merino and Gyokeres front two in the absence of others from Arteta is because Merino thinks just as fast. I have my worries about a Gyokeres and a Merino or Havertz front two or front pairing, as I've spoken about before, losing some of the Jesus chaos and the creative sparks that he gives, and asking Gyokeres to do a little too much roaming or a little too much back to goal bounce padding than he's used to. But Merino from these positions does release from the pockets, possibly better than anyone else in the squad. That gap that Gyokeres has found off the Merino pass here closes, unfortunately, leaving examples like this where he's actually made up ground on the defender, sort of few and far between. There's an urge, a correct urge, to want to find these situations more, and I think a floatier and hence a less predictable Odegaard helps, but I want Gyokeres to do more of this bundling off of defenders. That's how you begin to get defended differently too, and have a bit more time on the ball as defenders begin to respect you and be reticent of you. And this is where I want to begin to look at Gyokeres back to goal, because I look at Merino as a comparison, how good he is as a false nine, how he times his movements and drops to create that bit of distance, how safe that first touch can be as a result, and then how he can set for contact, use his body to shield the ball, and how smoothly then he can swivel and play in runners. I'm not asking Gyokeres to do exactly this, but this is a good example of what he's not doing for Arsenal right now. Gyokeres was one of many things that ultimately compounded in the sucker punch performance away to Aston Villa, but that inability to make it stick up the pitch, I think, helped encourage one too many waves of Villa pressure that eventually bared fruit for them. Had he improved drastically in this regard? before the injury? Yes. But if there are games where it's not going to stick, what are you going to do for us beside from that? How are you going to justify that trade-off? Do I think we play one too many straight vertical passes into him? Yeah, absolutely. Do I think we give him one too many bobbled passes into his chest, where we should be looking to bring him into the game on the floor and into the channels, where he can use his sides a bit more, look a bit more robust, confident? Yeah, I think we do, because that also encourages in these places where he can hold it up in the channels a bit more, it encourages our wingers to take up some more interesting positions. And if we can get more of Saka, Eze, even Merino being our outlets, and maybe a Gyokeres or a Martinelli crisscrossing on top, I think the more we can do this, the better. Some more unpredictability in how we look to play out or over a press, basically. Let's talk other solutions too, or more, let's recap. A more floaty Odegaard certainly helps open up the pitch and not condense things to one side. Let's look to return to those combinations which leave Gyokeres hanging off the last line a bit more, because that's where not only we can access him a bit more, but make the most of that occupation. If we are going to look for Gyokeres, can we do it through the spaces we can create on the left-hand side more, often kick-started by a Trossard pass? And balance overall, balance to that front line, especially when we have so many options, as me and Clive on Twitter were discussing. I think it's a really good point. How we find the right balance with so many frontline players is key, and we can find that balance in many different ways. Against Villa, we didn't have enough runners, and maybe who was fit, who was available plays a part in that, granted. And then in the match against Brentford, we had our counter movements absolutely nailed, and Merino's false nining was balanced out well. Gyokeres does give that option beyond, but I'll repeat, at least for now, he is just an option. To give you my view on Viktor Gyökeres so far, I think when we look to find the right balance off Merino, the right counter movements, that's our best look. But I think our needs change if and when an Eze shifts to the left, or Calafiori is potentially shifted back a bit into left centre-back. You can see why, in theory, a Kai Havertz is kind of a best of both worlds here. But I think that Gyokeres needs to add a few more of these layers of detail, bits to his game, because I don't want to reach a point where we are having to move these massive parts to accommodate him, but those smaller adjustments Arteta spoke about at the start of the season. At the moment, the limits that I spoke about with Gyokeres are being a bit too noticeable, and that's because certainly after he's come back from injury, the trade-off for what he's giving us elsewhere hasn't been as noticeable. It's a collaboration. Gyokeres has qualities he is offering, as I hope this video has shown. He's not what some people are painting him to be. But the rhythm that he had pre-injury, I think that needs to be the minimum, not the ceiling. And that's when he can really be able to help the squad, help the team who, remember, are top of both domestic and European leagues. And if we can discover that Gyokeres, that's a much better place to be in. Even if now I think we risk sacrificing a little too much, which was the risk at the start of all of this. But I hope you've learned something from this video. I hope you found it enjoyable or informative in some way. Thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, hype, subscribe, do all of that. I will see you very shortly. Thank you so much once again. See you later.